as well.
Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think, I know, Shannon, you're familiar with where 21st Century School Fund is such an odd bird in this world that I thought it might make sense to give folks a little bit of a background. I started the organization about a little over 25 years ago. My kids were in the public schools in the District of Columbia. I loved their school. It was a dual language immersion school, you know, my neighborhood public school, but it was just a wreck of a building in terms of its condition. And so we started organizing in the community and knew that this was a problem that wasn't just in Washington, D.C. But we were working at that point just in Washington, D.C. And you know, clearly was a vision that we were going to make a difference if the public, the civic public, and the government worked together on this. So go ahead to the next slide. Basically, as a, you know, kind of a small nonprofit, kind of outside of, you know, the school district and the governmental systems, we were, you know, sort of looking for how do we get to the table. We knew that we couldn't get our school facilities supporting education, supporting neighborhoods, unless there was planning. But we wanted to be at that planning table. And so part of what we got involved in very early on was trying to understand and get and create any data we could on the condition of school facilities, the equity associated with school facilities, all of the issues around school facilities. And in doing that research, part of what we learned is that very few of the data management tools were analytical. They might be compliance, like a work order system, or you know, some of the programming for an individually site-specific school. But there were very few tools out there that helped educational facility planners or community people really analyze and understand the issues of equity and access, you know, that Matthew's, you know, talking about in Durham. So we started developing tools, and, you know, always at the same time we've worked with our partners. We work closely with this group of cast of characters and in coalitions, and let's just go on from there. Clearly, in trying to do the research, one of the things that we've been trying to do is get language, capture some standardized sort of data points on school facilities, and we've done that sort of locally in the District of Columbia for state level work as well as nationally. Go ahead, Matthew, the next one. One of the things that we realized from working, you know, primarily in our own, you know, District of Columbia, and then with other nonprofit partners in urban areas, is that we realized the states were going to be important to solving problems of equity, and and even of capacity for some of the really small districts. You know, that the states should be doing more, and I'd argue that they still need to be doing more. But so we helped start the National Council on School Facilities, which is the Association of State Facility Directors, and we continue to staff them. Go ahead. But frankly, after many years of working at the city level and then working with state folks, one of the things that we realized is that even that, you know, that basically the problem and the scale and the scope of our nation's public school buildings and grounds is so massive that it was going to take us all. We had to have a federal, state, local partnership. And one of the things just to note is that really from the work that we and others have been doing, for the first time, we did get school facilities in an infrastructure bill. And HR 2, which passed on July 1st, has a $100 billion grant program for public school facilities. And you will be pleased to know, because somebody who loves the planning and knows that planning is the best way to get it right, there is a requirement that before districts can spend their federal dollars, which go to the state, they have to have master plans. And these master plans are actually somewhat defined in the federal law. Now, the reality is that right now it's unlikely to pass the Senate, but just the fact that it has passed the House is in the Transportation and Infrastructure Bill. And we think there's real good possibility that if not in the 116th Congress, that it will pass in the 117th Congress. Go ahead. So this is just going to, it conceivably could be a game changer for our districts. So part of though that, you know, there's the research, there's the advocacy, and then, you know, as we've done projects and worked on this, we really have been concerned about the lack of tools around information technology, around, you know, that helps the non-technical community engage in these very technical issues, and also informs the planners. And so this is a set of the things that we've worked on over the years. This is the boundary planner, which we'll talk about. We did a cost calculator for joint use. We did that with the Center for Cities and Schools. We've been, you know, tracking and policy and practice with our best partners. And then we've been working over many years on a kind of an inventory integrated database for facilities planning, which still is basically an in-house project. We've used it in the District of Columbia and other places, but we're working on trying to get the state directors to do state-level databases on school facilities. And then we've, you know, worked on enrollment projections. This is the next year enrollment projections portal that we did in the District of Columbia. Again, like coming up with these tools to support the work of planning and policy reform at the local and state level. Go on to the next one. So one of the technology tools, which is, you know, one of our newer ones, is what we call Boundary Planner. And one should never start with the boundary planning part, which I think is why what Matthew's described is so important. But it can follow and be a part of a community tool in looking at student assignment. And where we developed this initially because we were hired by actually the deputy mayor's office and the DC Public Schools to support them in redrawing boundaries, which really hadn't been redrawn since, I don't know, it was probably 30 or 40 years, a little bit like Durham. And we started out by doing all kinds of focus groups and community meetings and interviews on values. And what we found is that people cared about predictability and getting rights to their neighborhood schools. They cared about walkability. They cared about equity, access to high quality schools, to specialized schools. They cared about racial diversity, and they cared about where there was concentrated poverty. And these were sort of the values that we wrestled with, but they took positions on each of these things, frankly. And then, of course, there's the administrative and the logistical issues that are very much a concern. Matthew talked about the crowd and about trying to, you know, get transportation right, making sure every kid has a seat, the conditions in the capital program, and, you know, the projections around growing or not in the district. So we developed this tool because it was clear it was just frankly too complicated and we needed a way to capture student level information, school level information, and geospatial information and put it all together. Go to the next slide, Matthew. So what really the point of the tool was to help build trust about changing boundaries, because I don't know if there's any community that really trusts the school district to change the boundaries, but certainly in the District of Columbia, there was very little trust. The other thing is that from one of the cases that we made to the deputy mayor and to the administration is, look, this is really complicated, and there is no right answer, and you certainly don't know what it is, and you don't want to say you know what it is until the public fully understands the complexity of what you're trying to do. And so bring them in early, you know, like sort of make it an open process so that they can see and be a part of the struggle, that ultimately they own the problem and you're tasked to solve it, but it's really a community problem. So we wanted the public to actually understand and appreciate the complexity. And the other thing, of course, is that we needed the public. We needed their creativity. We needed their insight into the micro world of transportation and neighborhoods and school quality and their sort of calculations that they were making. We needed to understand those and have their creative ideas in solving for the student assignment policy and the boundary implications. So those were really the three main purposes. So in the tool, and in just a minute, I'm going to switch to the sort of online version itself, but just to understand a little bit. So one of the first things that the tool does is it compiles and displays data. So we're trying to marry the student level data, the school level data, and geospatial data. So what do we have in here? We've got student level data that's built off their addresses, student addresses, grades, race. We don't have free and reduced lunch data for Durham, but we did have a socioeconomic factor in DC, and it obviously could hold that. There's special ed status, ELL status, and the school a child attends. So then we've got school level data. So the enrollment, the capacity of the school, the counts and percentages of student attributes in that, as well as in the Durham one, we have the FCI too of the building, so building condition data. Then we have the data by school boundary, and this is one of the interesting things that you see in Washington, D.C. and in Durham, and probably you see it in Kansas City, is the mix of the kids that are in charter schools versus in the neighborhood public school versus in the magnet schools by boundary, right? And so who's living there, the age-appropriate kids living there, as well as you know, kind of where they're attending. And then one of the tools of this system is that we actually work from a census block. The data is summed by census block. So the student level data, we're not using the point data for students, but we're using the census data by you know, the student level data by block. This speeds the processing, it protects privacy, and it provides a foundation for moving blocks to redraw boundaries. Now, what you'll see with Durham is that it's a little more problematic in Durham than it was in DC in terms of the, you know, I don't know how some of these blocks got drawn, and I'm hoping that maybe some of you familiar with blocks in your cities might have some insight into what's going on with the blocks in Durham, frankly. Go to the next slide. So how did we use, you know, you'll see the tool in just a second, but how did we use it in the engagement process? So we had an advisory committee. Everybody had a login, you know, username and password. They couldn't see data from blocks if there were less than, I think, five kids in it, because you didn't want anybody to be able to say, oh, I've got a second grader, you know, who's ELL, and oh, I know who that kid is, right? So it had different administrative levels, but and they could go in and they could play around with moving blocks and seeing how that impacted the capacity, and they could look at it to see what streets they had to do. You could go into satellite view and see, oh, that's that apartment building there, or you know, various ways that you could see your context better. But so we had some committee members who loved it and went into it, you know, with gusto. But the main way we used it is we actually set it up in town meetings, and people sat around it with our staff person, and they said, well, what about this? Try this. And they could see what would happen when a block was moved or something happened, and they would talk about it with each other and say, no, we don't want to have to walk those 3 blocks, or you know, we don't want to go there. Or there was a whole dialogue about it. It was really kind of interesting. And then we would take that input back and come up with other scenarios. But it gave the folks an opportunity to see immediately, understand that you could change it and change it again. That wasn't like, they didn't have to feel like anybody was going to get attached to a scenario that was put out, because they could see how easy it was to change the scenarios. You know, we found, of course, that most parents and community members were just concerned about what was in front of them, their schools, their communities. And but it enabled us to focus in, but you can't make any change without it making a change in the entire district. So they could see that their input was affecting everything, and nothing, you know, would be there in isolation. So go to the next slide. That might be it. So let me just take, can I get the screen now, Matthew? I think I can. Where did it go? Did I lose you?
No.
I don't know what happened to it. So what happened, Matthew?
Well,
see, I've got my chat.
Mary, would it be easier if I pull it up on my side?
Yeah, why don't you just pull it up, but make sure that I can see you, because I don't see. I think I might have accidentally signed up. So you go ahead, because I'm on the phone, and I'll just log in again. But you pull it up on your screen, and let me just join. You're gonna have to let me into the meeting again, I think, Matthew.
You can see.
Oh, there I am.
I'll pull it up here.
So,
and we'll test drive this for a second. So.
Okay.
Bethesda was an interesting one, Mary. So let's talk about that one first.
Yeah.
Go right ahead. So you can see.
Okay. So click on Matthew. You're logged in, right? So click on District Elementary Schools and highlight Bethesda. Okay. So you're going to go to your menu, hit Bethesda. Yeah. And so let me just orient folks for just a minute. So Matthew, hit the legend. So Shelton just fixed that for me. Hit the legend over here on the right. Go all the way to the right under Durham Public Schools. Go all the way to the right, legend. Hit it. There you go. So these are the icons, just so folks understand. We have on the map charter schools, kind of elementary K-8 and middle district, which is the Durham Public Schools, and the Durham Public School Magnet School. So the blues are all Matthew's 33,000 children, right? And we've got boundaries, elementary boundaries, green, and then Matthew can explain they have a set of auxiliary boundaries, and they are different type auxiliary boundaries. But so that's kind of just so that when you're looking at the map, you understand why we've got circles on some, and you'll see, you know, how many magnet schools, how many charter schools are in his district. Okay, thanks, Matthew. So the little, you can see, highlight a census block. Anyone, doesn't matter. They're everywhere. That's a census block. So you can see that all of those little lines, that's what the census blocks look like in Durham County. It's kind of amazing to me. I mean, in the District of Columbia, they're nice, neat blocks. And, but that's what they look like here. And you can see in this census block, if you look at the census block profile, that there are 12 age-appropriate students that live in it. 9 of them go to Durham Public Schools, 2 of them go to charters, and 1 of them go to a Durham Public School magnet. 3 are white, 0 Asian, 7 black, 0 Hispanic, and 0 other. And you can see the grade distribution of it. Now you're in the administrative view. So if you were a public user, you wouldn't see, you know, again, because there's like if there's one pre-K kid in that census block, you might know, you know, who they are. You can see about the school, the enrollment capacity of Bethesda Elementary is almost 700, but it's fascinating. There are almost 1,800 age-appropriate kids who live in the Bethesda boundary. So that's why, Matthew, when you're saying we want a seat for every child, I'm thinking, interesting. That language one might need to be a little careful with.
Imagine what you're referring to.
Huh?
Keep going.
Yeah. So, so this is a census block profile. Going to the school boundary profile. So this is where that number, this is where that comes from. So 752 of the kids that are age appropriate for that school and live in that boundary are in Durham Public Schools. You know, they're not all in Bethesda, but they're in, you know, you can see 500 of them are in a magnet school from Durham Public Schools, or no, 500 in charter and 464 in magnet. But, you know, to me, this is a real head scratcher. Like, well, what are they not in Bethesda Elementary because there really isn't room for them, and so they had to go someplace else, or did they go someplace else because they didn't want to go to Bethesda? You know, I mean, this is partly why you have to talk to the community, because they'll tell you. they'll tell you what, you know, kind of their decision metrics. Yeah. You can see, and that's without even adding, you know, pre-K wasn't, I mean, I guess you have pre-K in that school, but not, obviously not universal, you know, pre-K 3. But, so, and then going to the target school profile. So there's kind of different ways of looking at it. If you go right above there, yeah. So here it just tells you it's a K-5. There's, you know, the enrollment, the capacity, and what the projections are. The FCI, I guess, is not in fabulous shape. Is that true, Matthew?
All
relative. The 0.34.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. But about half African American, you know, a third Latino. I have to say those numbers. Yeah, no, I guess they're about right. 50, 36, 45% other. Yeah. So anyway, so you can see that you've got some information here together, and then Matthew, just start. Let's say down in the southern part. I mean, where would you, if you were going to have to like reduce that 1,800, where would you pull your kids? What would you be looking at?
Yeah, and I'd say, Mary, so when we go down that's a trail that for the purposes of today, I think what we can share with folks is we can begin to toggle. Parkwood is the fuchsia colored boundary here, and you can see the associated
Yeah.
blocks there. And then you can also see up here the Spring Valley. So what we have the ability to do, that whether it's someone behind a desk or at a community meeting, is beginning to look at different simulations, scenarios. Like, well, what if this block went over to Bethesda? And so that's partly what we've been building with Mary over the last, gosh, Mary, what's it been, about 6 months at least that we've been working on this?
Yeah.
Like 9 months, big picture. One of the things that we discovered that is really problematic, but can be worked on, is just that, you know, our boundaries were drawn in about 1988, give or take. What that means is that they do not clip at the
Right.
block group level. And so as a function of that, you have a lot of partitioning. That makes
Right.
that analysis a little bit more of a triangulation of information. So our boundaries currently need clearing up irrespective of that. One of the things we're seeking to do is align them more with some of our main secondary sort of spatial separations, like Highway 70 here. It would make decent sense to align the boundaries. But I want to leave time, because we've talked about really cool innovative tool here with Boundary Planner, but also a much bigger process of boundary changes during a global pandemic. And so, Mary, if you'll permit me, can we, I think that's a good overview of the resource that you have for us.
Yes, absolutely, man.
Gratitude, and you all can begin to see, I think, how this tool could be used not only as a community, but also as a school system that may not have this functionality in